Hello, welcome to our Right High panel, A Day in the Life of Self-Care. I'm your moderator, Elizabeth Davis. And now, here are the more interesting people to present themselves.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. And I'm really excited to be here today talking about self-care. I think it's a really important topic that sometimes we forget about when we're dealing with things like plot and characters and setting and all that jazz. So I write in a variety of genres. I write mostly short fiction, mainly in science fiction, fantasy, and crime fiction.
I'm Chyina. I'm an editor and a multi-genre author as well, and I also write mostly short fiction, but I also dabble in poetry and longer work. Um, I'm really excited to talk about self-care, especially as a neurodivergent writer. I think that sometimes those who are neurodivergent really need to focus on self-care and make a deeper commitment to self-care. So I'm really excited to be on this panel and talk with you all today.
My name is Kalyn Josephson. I'm the author of several YA and middle grade fantasy books, including The Stark Descent, which comes out this fall. I am also really excited to talk about self-care because I feel like I've learned a lot about it in this last year, having kind of like two series at once and really having to carve out time for myself. I'm also really excited to hear what you all have to say because I could use some advice myself.
Hi, I'm Lucy A. McLaren. So I've got my debut book came out last year. It's a dark fantasy called Awakening, The Commune's Curse, book one. I'm currently working on the second book in that series and a standalone fantasy story. And my day job is as a counsellor, so I have a keen interest in self-care. Kind of, I guess, in the position to know a huge amount about what self-care should look like, but also it's way easier to tell my clients to do it and not listen to that advice myself. Especially, I became a parent a couple of years ago as well, whilst writing the first book, and that had a huge impact on mental health. And so I'm only just kind of recovering from that and learning how to implement self-care as a writer. So like all of you, I'm looking forward to talking about this. I think it's a really important topic.
Let's start with our first question from someone who is terrible at self-care. What is self-care?
That's a good question. So I guess it looks different for everyone, right? It's I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to that, but it's whatever is going to help you to recharge, because I think as writers there's a danger of wanting to reach a certain goal, or perhaps you become so engrossed in what you're writing that you kind of forget to take a break and take a step back. And I often think when you get to a point of being like creatively blocked, or just feeling like you're sitting down but it's like pulling teeth trying to write something, that's like your brain telling you really need to take a step back from it. And it's quite easy, I think, also to push yourself to the point of like burnout, because you want to get the next chapter and get the next story written, put it out on submission or whatever it might be, because we're writing these stories, I think, a big part of it for ourselves, but also ultimately we want to get published, right? And we want our stories to be out in the world, and they have to be finished to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I have a tendency to kind of let everything else fall to the wayside, especially when I'm on a deadline. Almost nothing else will be prioritized, and you can see it within my life. And so what I've kind of, for me, honed in on as self-care in the last year is both a mental and a physical component. And like you were saying, Lucy, that kind of like mental needing to recharge and refill the well, and finding what things do that so that you don't hit that burnout. But also new for me this year was the physical component, and treating my body differently, as if what I do takes a physical toll, because it does. And I mean, for example, like literally like icing my hands after a long day of writing, just like things that previously it didn't even occur to me that like this actually does take both physical and mental toll on me.
I think that self-care, if we try to like force it into a box, is just making sure that you do what you can to stay physically, mentally, and emotionally well. Because I think all of those things, like Kalyn was saying, work together really well. And like Lucy was saying, it's different for everyone. What Lucy does to take care of herself might stress me out, so I can't do that. For some people, going on a bike ride would be extremely, calming, and that would stress me out because I never actually learned how to ride a bike. So just the thought of that kind of that wouldn't work for me. But self-care is doing, is making sure that you are able to go on and in a healthy way, not doing this because you have to, doing this because you have a deadline, doing whatever it is because you just have to, but because you feel like you're able to do it and you want to do it, and that you're not pulling from, you can't, draw blood from a turnip, as my mother would say. So making sure that your well is always full so that when you give something, you're not, giving the last of yourself.
I echo what everyone else has said so far. It is going to be different for everyone, this definition of self-care. Chyina brought up this analogy of a well, and I think a lot of people have different analogies that mean the same thing. For me, like in my family, we talk about refilling our cups. And so when our cup is full, it's when we feel happy and fulfilled and we're able to pursue the higher goals like creative writing. If you think about like Maslow's hierarchy, you can't get to creative writing if you don't have your other needs fulfilled first. And so for me, as someone who was brought up to, and who has a personality and was brought up to believe that I need to put others first before I take care of myself. For me, my first step is recognizing when I'm doing too much of that and I'm not paying attention to what I need. And so once I like step back from that and think about, okay, what is it that I'm missing? Why isn't my cup filling? That's when I can start thinking about self-care. So I think for everyone, it's just figuring out what's the first step in recognizing that you're a person who needs to be taken care of as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point, kind of identifying when you need that break and how to do it. And something that Chyina too, I think really resonated with me, which is finding stuff that's sustainable. You might find something that works, but you can't do all the time. And it kind of depends, like what is something that that you're going to be able to stick to.
One thing that I thought was interesting that was brought up was the idea of physical versus mental self-care. Honestly, there's overlap, but I figured I would start off asking about physical self-care that you have to perform as writers, such as avoiding carpal tunnel or hurting your back from slouching your computer all day, all the way down to how do you remember to eat?
I don't understand anyone that forgets that. That's not a problem for me, the eating thing. I'm like constant supply of writing snacks.
I was just gonna say, I also love writing snacks, but for me, and this may have something to do with like just the way my brain works, I always forget to drink water. Mm-hmm. And I have no problems drinking water, but like if I get too caught up in what I'm doing, like the entire day will pass away and it'll be like 8 or 9 hours before I've had anything to drink or eat, and I don't realize it. And so because it's not top of mind, like because I'm so caught up in what I'm doing, I don't feel hungry, I don't feel thirsty. All I'm doing is maybe working on that project, or or I got this really great new idea syndrome and I have to get it out before I lose it. So for me, I have this humongous bottle of water, like it's huge. It's, I think, 70 ounces of water or something like that. And I try to go through like that in a day. But it's, and this also, I know for those who have ADHD works really well, setting a timer, like a random timer to go off to just remind yourself, drink water, eat something, like,
yeah,
and it'll just go off throughout the day. And that, just gets you in the habit of breaking up those that constant flow of work.
Yeah, I like the idea of setting a timer. I kind of do something less official, which is that I treat other things such as self-care, including remembering to eat and other, like I said, icing my hands and stuff, as part of my schedule. It's kind of similar to how I approach edits in a book. Like I get very overwhelmed if I have to think about everything. And so I break it down into smaller pieces and what am I trying to accomplish that day? And I've started including the self-care as part of that schedule. So like I'm going to accomplish 2 chapters, and then after that, I'm going to have lunch. And then after that, I'm going to take a stretching break. You know, whatever it is, it becomes part of the schedule.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of looking at it, having a schedule or routine. If it works for you, obviously that kind of stuff doesn't work for everyone. I'm kept to a schedule by my toddler, so you know, like if I'm feeding him, you know, it's my lunchtime too, so that helps. And I'm kind of, my writing routine is kind of dictated by him, and you know, as soon as he goes to sleep, I'm writing. And it's like when you said about posture, I think that's probably my worst habit, is like hunching on the bed next to him, like, and then I'll look in the mirror next to me and be like, wow, like my spine is just not good. And I think I remember reading a quote from like Margaret Atwood, who was like seriously make sure that you're paying attention to your posture as a writer, because you'll find yourself like suddenly in your 60s, 70s, like with really bad back problems. So I'm trying to bear that in mind, because I don't think you realize, again, when you're so like in the zone, you could just have like, completely hunched, like your arms aren't in good positions. And then it's only when you start getting like chronic neck and shoulder pain, which I do get, you're like, yeah, I can see why that's happening.
I think a lot of us too are naturally very sedentary in nature. You know, a lot of us started as bookworms, and that's not exactly a highly physical activity. And so for me, it was important to pick 1 or 2 activities that I could do to make sure that I stay exercised, because exercise is not top of mind for me usually. But as I'm getting older, I'm realizing that I need to stay physically fit. And so for me, I like to make sure I'm getting, you know, 1 or 2 hikes every week. I have a dog that helps, you know, he reminds me, hey, I need to go out. We have a stationary bike, and that's really easy to do. But also sometimes when you're hitting that creative brick wall and you're just bashing your head against that figurative wall, trying to figure out, okay, why can't I get through this plot snarl or whatever it is I'm trying to figure out? That kind of reminds me too of, oh, I haven't gotten up in a while. Maybe I'm just going to go take a walk. And oftentimes it's that change in energy. You know, you're changing from a mental creative state to a physical kinetic state that actually frees up the mental energy you need to get past that block. So I'm not super athletic. I'm not, you know, a sporty type or anything like that, but I definitely try to keep in mind of, okay, have I gotten my hikes in this week? Have I done something physically strenuous? It doesn't have to be, you know, high exertion, but it has to be some sort of exertion, because I need to stay healthy, and I need to make sure that my mind is also getting that break to be creative.
I really like that idea, because I think sometimes, you know, we've all talked about it so far, that we get so caught up in having to accomplish something with writing, or reach a certain point, that we deprioritize other things. But to your point, like doing those things is going to make our writing better and potentially solve problems. So it's not like you're taking time away from writing in order to do these things, but you're doing these things in order to write.
Yeah, and I think too, as writers and readers, we think, oh, every single minute has to be writing or editing or reading or doing research into the industry. And when I was hiking, oftentimes I would have an audiobook on. I mean, that's how I got into audiobooks, because I'm like trying to maximize all my time. And then I realized that still wasn't the break that I needed. So now I hike, and I don't have anything on. I just listen to my dog. I listen to other people. I listen to nature, and it's a lot more of a break that I need. Instead of thinking about, oh, every minute has to be maximized doing something creative.
Yeah, I think actually when you do those things, it's like engaging a different part of your brain. And that's when those plot holes start to be solved. Like your brain is doing stuff in the background, which always amazes me. And then suddenly it'll be like, well, for me, it's almost always the most inopportune moment. Like the moment I'm about to drift off to sleep, suddenly it's like, ding, oh, this is how you solve that plot hole. You suddenly have to write it down. Or like driving, or in the shower, somewhere that you can't write it down. But also I have noticed going for a walk and just, not having anything on, just letting yourself be present in the moment, that, it does something to your brain. I think perhaps lets that creative side of your brain relax a little bit, where it, like, I imagine it getting really pent up. The more you kind of focus on writing, the more you're squeezing it, and you just sometimes have to let it go and let your brain tick away and throw the ideas out when it's ready.
I was just going to share example of terrible self-care over here, and to ask a speed round question about best favorite writer snacks. That the ideal lunch and break is you take a nice leisurely lunch and, you know, really get into it, mindful, and, you know, enjoy life. When I'm working in an outside office, the only way I remember to eat is if I make my entire packed lunch something I can eat while working. So I'm saying, going, can't pack that leaves residue. That makes my hands greasy, so I have to take a break, but I can bring this. Yes, it is a lot of string cheese, baby carrots, and
Mhm.
so, but I figured that's a good segue into a speed round question. Favorite writer snack?
Chocolate digestives here. You know, I'm English, so it's chocolate digestives and a cup of tea. Sorted.
I don't actually snack when I write. I'm very like no snacks, no music,
What?
no nothing. I know. I use snacks more like rewards. Like if I'm like, oh, I finished a deadline, then I get a cookie.
See, but that works for you. Sometimes if I'm in the middle of like the murky middle of a plot and I don't really know what to do, I need snacks just so I can be doing something else, kind of. I love tea. Like I have an entire kitchen cabinet just dedicated to all the different types of tea I have, which is really, really bad. But one of my favorite writer snacks is Triscuits with hummus. That sounds weird, but it's really good.
Sounds good.
That sounds amazing, actually. I've gotten really into hummus lately, so I've been putting it on everything. But I'm like Kalyn, I don't think about writing snacks. What happens is more of a generic overall degeneration in my food. Normally I like to cook, I like to eat healthier and things like that. And when I'm right in the middle of a project or if I'm on deadline, all of a sudden it's like, okay, it's takeout, it's Doritos, it's, you know, it's whatever I can grab and just have in front of me and not have to prepare. So it's more of like that than writer snacks.
I have to say, as a above 30s white woman, along with, you know, receiving the mandatory yoga mat in the mail that, you know, everyone in America receives who are 30-year-old female presenting and white. I also got my mandatory addiction to Stacy's pita chips, which are a nice, non-greasy but very crunchy chip.
Oh,
For
nice.
those who are looking for something that doesn't leave a residue.
Mhm.
I see you at least understand my joke, so
I have no idea, but I'm just like, yeah, you know, crisps is. I'm trying to think of a UK equivalent, but they're all, yeah, they're not a good writing snack when you're getting like the chip. I'm saying chips now, crisps. You're getting the grease on your fingers. Yeah, yeah. Generally, I feel like also you're getting like the crumbs in your keyboard. You don't want to do that.
I totally get crumbs in the keyboard all the time. That's what the puffed air is for. Which I guess would go into its own self-care category of self-care of your electronics.
And I guess self-care of like what you're eating in general when you're writing and stuff for energy and power.
So one question that I know come up based on talking to other authors, and you're talking about giving the creative mind a break. Some authors I know like to use different forms of creativity as a break, such as painting, sculpting, yelling at the sky. Have you found that helpful or hindering in your experiences?
For me, it really depends. Like I have tried other creative pursuits, but what I find is that they draw from the same well for me, usually. They fulfill the same need as writing. So if I'm doing something else, it is kind of satisfying that need. And so then I don't do the writing. But what does work for me personally is usually TV, movies. So like having kind of a access to stories that I know that I'm never going to, work in, as opposed to like reading. Reading tends to draw from my well more than like TV, because I can kind of like shut my brain off a little bit and relax when I'm watching TV or watching a movie. while still getting kind of like that inspiration I get from consuming stories.
Yeah, same here, because I used to draw more than I wrote, but since I started writing, like that's just kind of fallen by the wayside. Plus, it helps that I'm better at writing than I ever was at drawing. So I'm just like, I'm just going to give up on that side of things. But I think it all comes from that creative part, doesn't it? It's all creative outlet. So it's taken from that same mental energy. So yeah, same as you, Kalyn. I enjoy consuming stories and TV, film, video games. And yeah, I think reading, I don't know if you've all found this, but since I started writing and editing a book, it's really difficult to turn off your editor when you're reading a book and like picking apart a bit. I want to just read this and enjoy it, but my brain just keeps going, oh, I'd write this sentence this way or whatever it might be. So that is draining in a different way. I love reading, but yeah, it does take part of that creative energy as well. So yeah, I know this is not really answering your question so much, Elizabeth, but it's just like I don't find that other creative stuff is helpful as an outlet. Yeah, I think I'm either like writing or just zoning out in front of the TV or watching my toddler, obviously.
Yeah, for me, the activity has to be structured. And so if I'm coloring within the lines, for example, like literally in a coloring book, I'm okay with that. But if you're asking me to freeform draw or watercolor, like I have a good author friend who she is fantastic at watercolor and can do it freehand. I can't do that. Like that for me draws from the same well as well. And I'm also, if you can't tell from the different genres I write in, I'm a little bit all over the place. And so, I'll take up knitting and then I'm like, okay, I'm done with that. And I'll take up coloring books and okay, I'm done with that. Now the next thing is like, I'm looking at crochet, like, should I go get crochet hooks? No, I don't need more activities. But at the same time, it's like, I think it's the process of learning that I enjoy as much more than the process of mastering the art, because like I can only have enough energy to master one art, and for me that's writing. So I put my focus on that. I like the others, like Kalyn and Lucy have said so far. I also enjoy consuming stories in other formats. So definitely, TV is a big thing, especially with all the streaming available now. We have access to so much more than we used to, especially the international films, the international storytelling community, I should say, especially through Netflix. We noticed earlier this week another Korean thriller dropped, and I'm like, holy crap! It looks fascinating, but for me, I cannot personally handle that kind of horror. So I was like, but that's amazing to me. Like there's all like 5 years ago, we never would have thought we would have access to something like that, and so yeah, I love consuming stories in other formats as well. But yeah, creative wise, a different activity has to be structured for me to feel like it's something different.
For me, it's a bit of both, and that is probably not helpful at all, but it depends on what it is. So I love reading. I will always love reading, and since I'm an editor, sometimes it is kind of hard to turn off the editing brain, like, why didn't they catch this like extra A here, or where is this comma coming from?
The comma comes from the comma cloud. We have no control over it.
Yeah, so sometimes it's hard, but what I do to help is I read stories I know I would never write. So I like a lot of the short stories I publish are quieter stories or full on like fantasy, like, so I'll read I love reading cozy mysteries or thrillers or suspense or things like that, things I know that I love reading, but I would never try to like write it because if I was trying to write it or I wrote the same genre, I feel like my brain would be like, how could I do something similar? Or this would work. So I try not to read, especially if I'm writing something currently, I try not to read pretty much at all. I don't even own a TV, so that's not a big outlet for me, but I've recently got into crafting. I've been making a lot of like journals and bookmarks and coasters and t-shirts. So that's kind of fun. But kind of like what Cindy said, it's more about learning than trying to master anything. I like the process of learning something new. And then when I feel like I'm kind of like, okay, this is good, now on to something else. But I also love, like I have been watching like Korean and Brazilian dramas since like 2012, and I will never ever stop. So, so if one of my friends says, "Hey, we found this new one" or something like that, I will definitely like drop everything and be like, "Okay, let me just watch this entire 70 episode like Chinese drama series or something," which I do not recommend. They're super long. Those kind of help because it's just something fun that, like I said, it's knowing that I would never write, or it's not something I'm used to doing, that kind of helps take my mind off of like the writing brain and make sure that I don't draw from my creative well.
Have you ever had to take a break from a story? Plot hole, just connect, but break your way through a plot hole, writer's block. You were like, I don't like where the story is going. I don't want to deal with these topics, anything like that. And how do you take a break from a story? Writing a different genre, take a complete break?
For me, I've taken plenty of breaks from the stories. And sometimes I take a break because I'm done with the draft and I just need to get away from that for a while. But sometimes I take a break because I no longer feel the way I felt when I started that story, if that makes sense. I no longer feel the same connection. And so that story may never see the light of day, and that's perfectly okay. I take breaks from stories sometimes if I feel like I'm working on something and something's not right. I'm always working on at least 2 or 3 projects at a time. Full disclosure, at least. So if story A isn't working, or if I can't figure out how to get from point A to point B, I'll just jump to story B or story C. And sometimes I'll even do a fun thing where the main character in story A makes a cameo in story C. So it's just, or I might just take a break from writing altogether because, if that burnout comes, and that's when I'll go to another creative outlet, or maybe I'll stream those 70 episodes of that Chinese drama that someone recommends me, or I'll take what I call a China days, which is a day where it's 24 hours where I turn my phone off and I just do whatever I want to do in those 24 hours, whether it's go to a bookstore and sit until they're kicking me out, or if it's go and like get a massage, or go and walk around a park or something like that. But for those 24 hours, it's just, I'm giving myself a yes day, basically. So, and that kind of helps with the creative process and getting back to the story, because it brings me enough joy to fill that cup up, so that when I do decide to go back to that story, if I never decide to go back to that story and just start working on something else, I don't feel bogged down, or like, oh great, I have to go back to this story,
I'm very impressed with your ability to jump from story to story. I wish I could do that. For me, I usually have to have like a stopping point in mind in order to take a break from a story, just because I have a very hard time getting back into it. And like, I will literally feel the need usually to reread everything I've done. So if I'm like halfway through a book, I have to reread half a book in order to get back into it. So for me, taking breaks is actually one of the biggest struggles with self-care. That is one of the things that I am very, very bad at and actively trying to get better at. Is giving myself time in between deadlines, in between tasks, whatever it is, to actually focus on something else and and actually refill that well. And like many other things, what I've found is that I have to, I'm a very schedule-based person. I have to make it part of my plan. Otherwise, I will just jump from one project to the next project and be like, well, this is the next thing I was going to work on. And one of the things that I've been also trying to get better at within that is when I'm on actual deadlines from my publisher, is making sure that we set realistic expectations for when my stuff is due. Normally I like to get things done. So if they're like, oh, can you get this back to me in a month? I'll just be like, yep. And I'll do it as fast as I can. And what I've been trying to do instead now is be like, well, when's the absolute latest that you need it, so that I can have as much time as possible to work on it. And also being just very upfront with them when I feel like I'm not going to hit those deadlines, so that we can plan together to adjust, instead of just being like, well, here's the quickest I can do it and I'm going to get it done no matter what.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I've jumped from genre to genre is because I've given up on a story in a previous genre, and the palette cleanser is to write in a different genre. Because thinking through how to structure a crime story, for example, is going to be very different from thinking through how to structure a fantasy story. The tropes don't always move from genre to genre, and that's what gives me the break that I need. That said, I definitely have a lot of stories in my trunk that I've just walked away from, because, and it's not because there's a story problem, but there's a I liked what Chyina said of, I don't connect with that story anymore. It's that as well, because sometimes my stories are inspired by something that I'm feeling or have experienced, or something that's very personal to me. And if that connection isn't there anymore, then all of a sudden that story doesn't make sense to me anymore. And I'm approaching it in a clinical way rather than a creative way. And so there's stories that I've walked away from where I want to go back. I want to go back and finish it, because I feel like they're important stories to write. But I need to do work on my end to get back to a point where I can approach the story and do it justice. And I may never get there, and that's okay. I need to be okay with that, because otherwise, that's just going to drive my anxiety even higher. But yeah, I think that's part of this whole conversation about self-care, is recognizing when you're ready to tackle a story again.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you get to the point of feeling blocked or stuck on something, like I said earlier, it's probably your brain telling you that you need to take a break of some description. I mean, I'm personally coming out of a very long period of weeks, I'd probably say months actually, of feeling like it was a real struggle to write anything. Part of that, I think, was an adjustment to having a child and the mental health repercussions of that, and postnatal depression, and finding how to be a writer with a child, because it's completely different. I used to be able to write whenever I wanted to, and now I've got to fit it around a small human. So I think for a long time I was struggling. I was trying to force myself to write. I was writing short stories, because I thought, if I'm writing short stories, maybe that means I can get it written and I don't have to worry about it being a long thing. But at the back of my mind, I had I need to focus on book 2 of my series, and also this other standalone fantasy that I started way before my son was born. And they were kind of at the back of my mind, and I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. And it got to the point where actually I felt like I couldn't write anything, and it was just whenever I sat down in front of my laptop, there was just nothing. But I found an amazing tool. So word processors, I don't know if you've heard of them, but it's just literally it's like a small laptop, but literally all you can do on it is write. You can't connect to the internet, you can't go on social media, you don't get emails, text messages. And I did not realize how much of a distraction those things were, and how much they were taking away from my focus. Because if I open my laptop up and it pings, and I get little notification thing at the bottom of my toolbar, I'm like, I have to look at that. And then I read something like it takes about half an hour for your brain to refocus again. So every time I'm being distracted, it's just taking me back out. So this has been a game changer for me. I'm shouting for the rooftops. I think every writer should get one. It's an amazing tool if you struggle with focus. And for me, it's really just lifted that creative block. I've written 10,000 words in the past 2 weeks, which is insane, because I was writing very little before that. So I think being able to recognize that the creative block, if you're having it, is there for a reason. It's be gentle with yourself, don't try and force things. Yeah, and I think it's probably the opportunity for a reflective period and to think, why is this happening, and what do I need to do to kind of take care of myself and get to a point where that creativity is accessible again.
I like this idea that I feel like you guys are kind of hitting on, of allowing yourself to fail, for lack of a better word. Like, you don't have to complete the story that you're not enjoying. Outside of deadlines, I think this might be a different conversation potentially, but when you're writing something new, that giving yourself permission to walk away from it when you need to is a really difficult thing to do, I think, sometimes. But it's very, very important, being able to approach your writing for creativity first instead of as a task to be completed. I have one for y'all. Do you ever experience, and how do you approach dealing with the feeling that you're kind of running out of time and that publishing feels a little bit like a race sometimes, that you have to be the one to get there first?
I think it's hard to avoid that feeling because especially on social media, when you're like seeing other people getting like contracts and deals, and especially I'm a debut author with a small press, so it's and I don't have an agent, so this idea, I think that's part of the pressure that I was feeling to finish this standalone book that I'm writing, because I was like, if I can finish that, I can query it, I can find an agent, and kind of take the next step in my writing career, essentially. And I think actually it's accepting that things take time in the publishing world, right? And to write a book and to get it into decent enough shape to put it out on submission anyway is a process in itself, and to just let that happen without feeling like you have to rush it, I suppose. And that it's ultimately not a race, right? You're not racing anyone. Other writers are not your competition. You got to do it for yourself and do it as you can manage, right? And everyone's going to have a different kind of schedule that they can work to. So don't compare yourself to others, I would say, on that front.
I completely agree. I think that especially with social media and Twitter, which is a mess right now, but you might see people that you knew when they were still drafting their book. Now the book is being published, or you see them announcing their agent or whatever it may be, and that kind of makes you feel like maybe you're doing it too slow, or maybe you're not going about it the right way. But you also have to remember that everyone's writing process is different, and everyone writes, everyone needs different breaks, everyone needs different things from their writing. And just because you might be still querying this book you've been querying for like 5 months now doesn't mean you're not going to get an agent. It just means that you just haven't found the one that's right for you. And so, to Lucy's point, just not rushing, not feeling as though you have to be in competition with other authors, and not feeling as though you have to compare yourself. Because I know that as a short story writer, it's kind of hard, like finding the presses to, reach out to, especially because first of all, you want to make sure they're legit. Second of all, you want to make, because that's a whole nother topic. Second of all, you want to make sure that is this just going to be a nice author byline, or am I actually going to get paid for this work? Because not a lot of small presses actually pay. They'll pay you in author copies, and usually it's like 2, and you're like, what am I going to do with this? But so knowing that your process is different, knowing that you don't have to conform yourself to what the publishing industry seems to want. Like for a few years ago, if you recall, there was like this huge YA fantasy craze, and every book had to be like a blank of blank and blank. Like that was the title. Every title had to be that for some reason, and I'm not really sure why. But you don't have to fit that standard. If you want to write a cozy paranormal mystery romance, do that. Like do what, or if you want to write like a noir, like suspenseful, like Spider-Man movie, I don't care. Like it doesn't matter what you write. It's just knowing that at the end of the day, your first audience is you, and you're actually the audience that's most important, because you want to be happy with what you put out. So if it takes you 5 years to be really happy with that draft, that's perfectly okay. Even if you haven't been published yet, that's fine. And if you're a writer who knows that they want to be published, and you know you want to write a novel, and you really just want to like get your feet wet, I suggest like working on a short story or a poem or something like that to kind of, get your writing chops up if that's what you choose. But knowing that you have to be happy with where you are, and no one can make you happy with yourself, sadly. Things would be a lot easier if that was true. But if you have to be happy with where you are in the moment. And once you're happy with where you are, it's a lot easier to write, because you're not stressed out about wondering, okay, how many agents should I clear this week? Or like, how long do I have before, you're not worried about those things. And worry and anxiety always messes with your creative process. So being okay with where you are is, I think, the first and most important step.
So it's funny you're asking this question, Kalyn, because I am a woman of a certain age, and I have been thinking a lot about running out of time in all sorts of different ways. And it's just, when you're faced with this prospect of you don't know how much time you have left. And in my personal life, I've had a few people pass unexpectedly. So this has been something that has been in the making for a couple of years, and so I had to lose my ability to write in order to confront that question, because I didn't take my writing seriously. I didn't think that I was a good enough writer. I didn't think I could sell my writing, or that anybody would read my writing outside of my friends and family, until I stepped away from a corporate job and just focused on tackling my writing full time. And people think, oh, that is such a dream position to be in, and things like that. And I will admit, I was very lucky to be able to be in a position to do that for a few years. And the other side of it is, all of a sudden, I was faced with making a really good income to making zero income, and especially, and then seeing like people who had day jobs were still getting agents, were still getting published through TradFi publishers, and looking at myself and thinking, well, what's wrong with me that I can't do this? And I don't have a full-time job, I don't have other than writing. And I got to a really dark place where I couldn't write anymore, because I felt like everything I wrote had to be commercial. It had to sell. It had to make money to justify the position that I was in, which is that I was a full-time writer. And it is very unhealthy. And ultimately, I went back to a corporate role. I have a day job now, and that has, even though, like Lucy, I'm relearning how to juggle my life, with now other responsibilities, and I still, want to keep writing, and I still want to be able to sell my fiction and things like that. It's freed me up again, because I don't have that pressure anymore of making sure every story I write is going to be published. And that was my purpose of getting back to a day job position, is just not having that immense pressure on myself. I also, speaking of day jobs, my background is in business, and one of the classic case studies, if you will, that we learned in business school. I'm sorry, my cat is jumping behind me. So if you see her pop up, that's what's going on. Oh, there's a tail.
Yeah, I'm just
Anyway.
to see the whole cat.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop trying to like stop her. But anyway, so in business school, we learned about the case study of Snuggie versus Slanket. Everyone's heard of a Snuggie, but nobody's heard of a Slanket. And the moral of that case study is the Slanket was the first to market, but it was not the product to become popular, because Snuggie had better marketing, they had a better go-to-market strategy, and all these things. And so I think about this idea of being first to market doesn't make you the winner. And Lucy, I think, brought this up earlier, of racing, to be to get your book out and things like that. And I think, there's so many examples of business where it's not an advantage. Just because you did something first doesn't mean you're going to stay in that top position, doesn't mean you're going to stay in that forefront. And we see it in writing and in creative arts, especially a lot recently. When you think about Kate Bush's song, Running Up That Hill, and how 30 years later, it's finally made her, a household name just because it was used in Stranger Things. And how, because she held on to the IP of that song, she can still earn royalties from that song. In writing, I don't know if y'all have seen it recently, the fact that This Is How You Lose a Time War, the book by Ahmad El-Mohtar, I hope I'm saying that right, and Max Gladstone. It came out in 2019. It didn't make the bestseller list. It has suddenly hit the bestseller list because some random person on Twitter, dumpster fire as it is, talked about it.
It was
Yeah.
It was a Tumblr fan account for not Castlevania. I have to double check.
Ridiculous.
Yes.
Yeah, just completely random, right? Dropped out of the sky, and all of a sudden, This Is How You Lose the Time War is a bestseller. Like, you just can't control these things. And the only thing you can control is keep writing, keep trying to publish, and hang on to your IP, hang on to your rights, and make sure that you're not getting taken advantage of by all the predators out there, because there are a ton. And I definitely, relate to Chyina trying to find short fiction markets. It is so tough for short fiction. But even with short fiction, think about like Netflix's Love, Death, and Robots series. Every single episode of that series came from short fiction. And I have discovered a lot of writers through that series. So don't give up hope. Just control what you can control.
I actually was really excited because I'm like, I read that short story first that they just adapted. It was a Kitsune one.
Red Hunting.
Yes.
Kenyo. In fact, I had not realized Kenyo wrote short fiction until I saw that episode. I loved it. I went to go find the collection in which it's published. It's published in a collection called The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories.
Yes.
And I discovered The Paper Menagerie is the first piece of short fiction to win the Nebula, the Hugo, and the World Fantasy Awards. I'm like, and his entire collection of short stories in that book is amazing. I recommend it to everyone.
I discovered him through LeVar Burton Reed. So, and they mentioned the short story. I'm like, oh,
right.
It's found at the library. So that's how I got to read that collection. But I feel like I've also seen the Kitsune one reprinted in like a steampunk anthology or something. But don't quote me on that. That could just be my playing tricks.
He might have, yeah. But at one point, speaking of Kenyo, he published 11 short pieces of fiction in 1 year. And I keep thinking about that. Like, I need to match that. And then I have to pull myself back. It's like, no, I don't need to match anything. I need to just keep my own writing. But I see that as like a pinnacle of achievement. It's me like trying to pull my overachieving self back of like, okay, I can't.
He had those written a long time ago. And, so the stars are right.
Yeah, exactly. It's again, like thinking about like, okay, he couldn't control when those stories came out. So it's not like, you're aiming for, I'm going to have 11 short stories published this year. You can't do that. You just got to keep writing.
So, we should be closing up the panel soon. I just was going to put in my 2 cents before we close up, which was do you feel like you're racing? Yes. I feel like I'm racing against my own mortality, and I only know that will end with self-acceptance. I'll let you guys know how that goes if I ever find it. And also about short story markets, because this is where I've accidentally become an expert, is Submission Grinder and Duotrope are going to be your friends, because they will list paying markets. You can actually, at least on Submission Grinder, Range It Does shows you the paying markets first. And you can look at what they're looking for before you go to their website. Also, Authors Publish will release theme calls for submissions that are short fiction and poetry calls. So that's a note for those who I know are wanting to publish more short fiction.
So I'm not super active on social media. I know that's horrible for an author to say, and I have decided that this is just part of who I am. I'm really private in person, and so I tend to stay quiet online as well as in person, this panel notwithstanding. But you can find me at my website. It's www.chhung.com. So it's just my pen name.com, which is easy to remember. There's a contact form on there if you want to send me a message, or you can DM me on Twitter. I do check it periodically. And I also have a Facebook page and both handles are CH Hung Writes, WRITES. So thanks very much, guys.
You can find me at powelleditorial.org. That's my website. It's both my author and my business website. Like I said, I am an editor. You can also, you can find me on, I don't have Facebook, but I do have Twitter and Instagram, Chyina_Powell, or you can just type it into Google. I'm the only one. So I'm pretty easy to find. And if you do go to my website, you can, there's a contact form, but there's also a chat box, and no one ever uses it, but it's me, guys. So if you want to use the chat box, you can talk to me. I'm lonely. But I'm pretty easy to find. Or you can I also run a nonprofit, so you can find me on that website too, which is the Women of Color Writer Circle.org. So
you can find me at KalynJosephson.com and Kalyn M. Josephson on Instagram. I do have a Twitter, but part of my self-care is pretty much not using it. It's pretty much updates only, but it is at Kalyn Josephson. And I recently started one of those Instagram broadcasts account or channels on my Instagram. So that's mostly where I'm communicating with people now.
I'm at my author website is lucyamclarenauthor.com. Yeah, I'm trying to step back from Twitter as well, because it is there's something on there right now, but Instagram is probably the main one you can catch me on. So it's Lucy_A_McLaren. You can sign up to my newsletter as well on my website. So I do send it out about every 6 weeks, and on that I do discuss a counselling theory every newsletter of that. I think it hopefully helps people to understand, write characters and understand their characters from a psychological perspective. So I think kind of plays into what we've spoken about, understanding the mental health of your characters. If that's something that you're interested in, please do sign up on my website.
Thank you everyone for coming, and thanks to our future audience for listening to this.